По нашим данным, они прячутся где-то недалеко от этих координат. Найдите росомах и уничтожьте их.
Я тут кое-что нашел.
This camo isn't real, but if you've seen Red Dawn, you already know why we made it. Yes, the rumors from the comment section are true. We've taken the camo from John Milius's 1984 classic Red Dawn and put it on our Gorka K. We also made some Calumet High Letterman jackets too. This story is about way more than just a piece of clothing. Get comfortable, because we're going to take you on a ride exploring one of the most controversial movies of the 1980s and our favorite Cold War film, Red Dawn. Wolverines! Why is Red Dawn so beloved, so historically significant, and so misunderstood? Red Dawn was made by an eccentric director with a shoestring budget of $17 million. But somehow, this little movie has cemented itself into the pantheon of iconic Cold War action films. It punches in the same weight class as Rocky IV, it holds you in suspense like The Hunt for Red October, and it's as inspirational as The Miracle on Ice. Frankly, it's impressive that a film like Red Dawn can even compete with the likes of Top Gun for cultural influence. Now, we can't get too far here without addressing the reaction to Red Dawn when it first hit theaters. There's no doubt about it. This is a violent movie. The protagonists are practically child soldiers. Civilians are routinely executed on screen, and absolutely nobody has plot armor. The theatrical release is actually toned down in comparison to the original screenplay. Early cuts were fairly brutal and even showed the use of chemical weapons. You can still read it online. It would have easily landed the film an R rating. Instead, significant portions of the film were reworked so that the theatrical cut of Red Dawn could be the first PG-13 movie in America after Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins made parents force the Motion Picture Association of America to create the rating in the first place. Still, Red Dawn's toned-down rating from R spurred on the National Coalition on Television Violence and Guinness Book of World Records to deem Red Dawn the most violent film ever made. It was an understandable reaction to Red Dawn's unvarnished depiction of Americans suffering under a foreign occupation.
It was a movie like no other movie.
Just 1 year prior to Red Dawn's release, 100 million Americans, or just under half of the US population, were captivated by a similarly shocking TV film titled The Day After. This 126-minute movie was an unflinching depiction of what exactly would transpire if mutually assured destruction happened, including graphic, realistic depictions of the nuclear holocaust. The Day After moved President Ronald Reagan so much that he noted in his journal that it was very effective and left me greatly depressed. Many historians credit the film with changing Reagan's mind on nuclear policy, leading directly to the reduction of the US and Soviet nuclear arsenals. Red Dawn had the same kind of sobering effect on many Americans. Now, you might be thinking these are some bold statements from KommandoStore, considering this film had a 48% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes? Why is Red Dawn so dismissed by modern film critics and the dreaded modern audiences? The main argument is something like this. There's no way America could ever be invaded by a foreign power. So why present a far-fetched story like Soviets popping up in our backyards with PKMs and shredding up our high schools? To pump the brakes on my sarcasm, the reality is that this sort of thing actually did happen for decades. Just not to Americans. Ukraine, Poland, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Poland again, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia all at once, Manchuria, Czechoslovakia, and lastly, the one that was actually happening while the film was in theaters, Afghanistan. Regardless of your feelings on our military budget or which politicians are in charge today, it's safe to say we take our safety for granted. Looking at the film's opening scene, there's little exposition before the Soviets surprise invade Calumet, a small mining town in Colorado. We think that premise alone is much more plausible and relatable than the invasion of a massive key city like New York or Los Angeles, as seems to be the setting for many invasion films. But instead of giant monsters or aliens, it's something much scarier and less human. Communists.
If they made a movie about real American teenagers who were trying to hide in the hills and the Russians had come, that could be interesting. But to turn these kids into paramilitary experts and have them totally outfox the communists in every single scene in the movie is so unrealistic and so visionary that I just sat there, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my ears, I couldn't believe my eyes, I couldn't believe Red Dawn deserved more than 1.5 stars, and I'm Roger Ebert.
I have no reality on being invaded. It's kind of like, oh, nobody will do that to the Americans. It really brings it very close to home and makes it very scary. It's like, I might be very paranoid after this film is over.
Important to show the war here, that the Russians are here, that this is, that we aren't inviolate, that we can lose everything.
As outlandish as this may seem to American audiences, the ages of Calumet's high schoolers are par for the course for modern insurgencies and arguably the norm for most of human history. Most of these soldiers who fought in America's Revolutionary War were in their late teens and early 20s.
War can be such a hell on who are really involved, which is the young, kids of our country. I mean, it's like...
Plus, it's something that we stood up for, too, The kids are standing up for their rights. Yeah. And it's done in a way where it could be real.
From the perspective of the plot, thrusting a bunch of kids into a literal war scenario also has a purpose. How do you communicate the perils of communism and tyrannical government to the kids who have never experienced serious hardship or even seen violence firsthand? Red Dawn could be viewed as an attempt to connect with the young Americans of the 80s. A literal youth-led rebellion is a genius narrative vehicle to accomplish this. Towards teens and young adults, Red Dawn shows just what being an American means. Conversely, Red Dawn, as a film, has been called American propaganda by many critics, and we're not exactly denying that it is. But not all propaganda is inherently bad. Is that a hot take? For all its faults, Red Dawn clearly articulates America's foundational values. Like the people of our nation's past, we fight even when we're backed against a wall. And we fight even when it means giving our life.
We're certainly not victims. We take our own life into our hands.
This message is reinforced by the adults in the film who support and encourage the Wolverines when they are scared and uncertain. To drive home the point, many adult characters bravely face their own deaths, unbroken by brutal repression. The downed pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Tanner, sacrifices himself bravely in battle. And of course, there's that harrowing mass execution conducted by the Soviets. In a time where the threat of communism felt remote and unimaginable to a generation of young Americans, Red Dawn brought a global struggle for a free world home to our living rooms. It would be easy for it to end at violently resisting the Soviets, but what really sets this film apart is its specific, wholehearted endorsement of the Second Amendment. This film makes a strong case for gun ownership right away, as the boys scramble to arm themselves when no police or military show up to save the day. The messaging slaps you in the face immediately. It should come as no surprise that the director, John Milius, is a certified gun guy who agreed to direct Red Dawn for $1.25 million and a gun of his choice. We think it's safe to say that he wasn't just a gun-collecting FUD. He's a true believer in 2A. Just look at the plot of the film. Red Dawn puts the Second Amendment in the very context it was originally written for, and does such a good job in making the case for civilian gun ownership that it even appeals to non-gun people. Milius doesn't stop there. Lots of Hollywood films show regular Americans with guns in a positive light.
Get off my lawn.
But to our knowledge, Red Dawn is the only film to explicitly challenge the underlying legal framework of gun control. One scene in Red Dawn underlines that most of all. This scene in the film is perhaps the most plausible part of the whole story. A corrupt group of people could find out exactly where you live, what guns you have, and even what you look like, should they simply seize these documents. And a big reason this messaging worked is that the director and everyone involved in the film cared about the Second Amendment and genuinely liked guns and military hardware.
I really feel strongly for the way we do this, as far as growing up in the hills and becoming a fighting force on our own. I think I feel strongly about doing that myself if this situation were to occur in my hometown.
They did everything they could to make the Soviet invasion feel authentic.
Milius utilized his background as a military historian to create realistic wartime scenarios. For Red Dawn, the director traveled to Washington, D.C. to consult with experts on modern warfare.
But they had to be crafty. Sourcing true Russian or Soviet equipment was nigh impossible in the middle of the Cold War. Vehicles were creatively acquired from countries nearby the Soviet Union or replicated with varying degrees of success. This Dishka is a M60 with a modified grip and a hilariously large muzzle brake. And don't even get the AK autists started on the amount of Valmets and wacky kit guns on screen. But the biggest creative leap in the prop department is also the piece of gear the film is best known for, the camo. Featured on the bad guys in the film from the start and eventually looted by the Wolverines, Red Dawn camo is entirely fictional. But the prop masters did an excellent job at making it look like it was designed by Soviets. It draws influence from the late World War II German splinter camo with its rain pattern present. It combines it with a touch of Russian biroishka, and the result actually works well as a real camo in the wintertime. In fact, Red Dawn camo was reused in Rambo III and the Fourth War on Soviet NPCs since it was so convincing. To our knowledge, sadly, most of the real movie costumes have been totally destroyed. The internet is awash with the kind of thing that just gets directly printed on t-shirts and workout shorts. High-quality uniforms using Red Dawn camo are scarce. So that's where our Gorka comes in. It's patterned off of a real Soviet military mountain suit, but only ours has massive improvements in the fit and function. For over half a decade, it's been the single biggest must-have item on our site, so of course, we had to give it the full Red Dawn treatment. We can relate to director John Milius quite a bit when it comes to putting that much passion into getting things right. Outside of Red Dawn, his writing had a huge influence on film. He's credited for lines like,
"I love the smell of napalm in the morning,"
and
"Go ahead, make my day."
Milius also wrote for the game Homefront, which has a very similar scenario to Red Dawn, except with a North Korea invasion instead. In 2009, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 exploded onto the scene and defined the absolute gold standard for military shooter games. The game revolves around global tensions boiling over, leading to a carbon copy Red Dawn scenario where Russians invade the United States by air. The invasion takes place in a chapter called Wolverines, an obvious homage to Red Dawn. In the mission, the player, or should I say
Ramirez,
is tasked with escorting a VIP and of course protecting Burger Town during a surprise Russian invasion in suburban America. The whole story from this part of the game and onward is a massive love letter to the film, just from a military and special forces perspective. And speaking of Call of Duty, this is where I should mention that regardless if you're a gamer, Second Amendment enthusiast, or a fan of Red Dawn, you should go and unlock the perks of Commando Pro at KommandoStore.com/pro. And of course, if you like content like this, we urge you to subscribe to our channel here on YouTube, as we're just going to keep putting up bigger and better videos for you guys.
So tired.
This movie doesn't have a traditional happy ending. You don't even get the satisfaction of seeing liberation in the end. The ending instead causes a moment of pause and introspection in the audience. The final scene shows Partisan Rock. It looks like a monument you'd see commemorating veterans of the Civil War. In fact, the phrase on the rock, "This nation shall not perish from the earth," is a direct quote from the Gettysburg Address. The fragility of our nation's unity was something far, far removed from cushy 1980s American society. With all that in mind, we struggle to see how Red Dawn could be construed as negative propaganda. It's incredibly important to show films like these to as many people as possible and have these difficult conversations about war and sacrifice. We'd highly encourage you to watch Red Dawn again and leave what your impressions or takeaways of the film were down in the comments. And of course, remember to check out our Red Dawn Gorkas and Calumet Letterman jackets on KommandoStore.com.